Marjolein and me will be hosting today's session. Before we proceed with our introduction, let's go through the basic rules of conduct. All followers of the last sessions already know what it's about. However, if you are new to the ConNext sessions, please be aware of the following. Please make sure your microphone and webcam are turned off, so not to disturb our presenters during their talk. We encourage you to ask questions, and please do so in the chat box only. We will cherry pick them for the Q&A sessions. For unknown technical reasons, some of the slides may show up zoomed in. If you think that this is the case, please use the zoom function by clicking on the magnifying glasses on the upper left corner of the slides. Last but not least, this is a conference for and by emerging conservators, so please respect one another for their exceptional effort of making this evening happen. Some of our speakers will be presenting for a large audience for the very first time, so please keep that in mind.
Marjolein, you are muted. Maybe Andreas can take over for her for 1 second.
Okay, I will take over. Welcome again to this fourth session of ConNext 2024. We are sure some of you are familiar with the ConNext format, but for those of you who are here for the first time, we'd like to give you a brief introduction. ConNext began during the COVID pandemic with just a few conservation training programs coming together to connect you, the students and emerging conservators, with your international colleagues and give you the opportunity to share your work. Since then, the network has grown considerably, bringing together even more institutes and covering a wide range of subjects, not just purely wood-related ones. Education is vital for the future of our field, and it all starts with sharing the results of your hard work, new insights, experiences, and knowledge. The ConNext format is designed to give you the opportunity to network with fellow students and colleagues of different universities. Actually, ConNext provides the framework to practice the kind of presentations that you will hopefully continue to make throughout your careers in future. As the organizing committee of ConNext, we hope to lower the threshold for you to submit abstracts to conferences such as ICOMCC, Ebonist, or Future Talks. So let ConNext be a kickstart for your national and international career and network. All ConNext evenings have headlines. Honestly, we have to admit that the headlines cannot be precise always, because the ConNext team does not fix a theme in the call of abstracts. Every year we receive a variety of rather different topics. However, among the papers of this year, which have been submitted, are some dealing with upholstered furniture. This suggested to name the evening Wood and Textiles. And this brings us to our keynote speaker of today. We'll kick off the session with Ms. Heather Porter. Marjolein, you will introduce Mrs. Porter.
Andreas, Marjolein still having difficulties, so you have to
okay.
keep on going for now. Sorry.
Okay, I will go on. Heather. Heather is a freelance upholstery conservator in London. She did an undergraduate degree in furniture restoration and an MA in upholstery conservation from the Royal College of Art, Victoria and Albert Museum Conservation Program. Since then, she has held various positions in institutions in America and the UK, including the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, a fellowship at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and a contract at Museum of Fine Art, Boston. Returning to the UK, to the Victoria and Albert Museum, the National Trust, and a number of years in the upholstery trade, Her most rewarding projects have been working with textile conservation colleagues to develop in situ cleaning methods for textiles and on collaborative projects to design and make non-intrusive systems for the application of conservation upholstery. Heather, we very much look forward into getting an insight into your line of work. The floor is yours.
Shall I turn my... All right, can you hear me now? Are we all good?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Well, I put this comedy slide up just to pique your interest from the start. This is not a, I should add, this was not a conservation project. This was a friend of mine who's a furniture restorer who brought this to ask if I could take all of the upholstery off so that he could do the frame repairs. And then I had to put all of the upholstery back on exactly as it was because it had to match some other chairs, which led me to think actually that might be quite a good starting point for the talk today, knowing that you're primarily as furniture conservators are going to be involved with the frame. So I didn't deliberately want to talk to you about all things textiles, because I think it might be nice for me to leave you with something that you can use in your own work. Well, that's my aim anyway. So here you'll see the issue already with upholstery conservation, in that it's quite a broad subject, and I think if you ask people what is upholstery conservation, the answer will differ depending on who you ask the question of. So if you ask the question of a textile conservator, you might get an answer somewhat like upholstery conservation is repairing the textiles, the trim, the things that are visible on the surface of a piece of upholstery. And if you ask a curator, it might be putting accurate upholstery on an object which is suitable for display. Furniture conservators, likely both, because it's not your area of specific knowledge. So I prefer to divide it up into two terms. So we have upholstery conservation, which is involved in what you have and you conserve those materials. Or if you flip them around, you get conservation upholstery, which is reupholstery, but generally not using traditional materials and almost never using traditional attachments. So examples at the top and the bottom. So the chair at the bottom, from a condition point of view, this is another thing with conservation upholstery. It's not always about the condition of the object, because you can see in the bottom left picture the condition is almost perfect. It's just not very nice and doesn't accurately indicate what that chair should have looked like, which after treatment and an awful lot of curatorial research and examination of the frame, we recreated what we believe to be much closer to the original appearance. In the bottom right there. Oh, wrong button. So let's start at the beginning. All upholstery is attached somehow, but attachments are in themselves quite interesting. So you've got tacks on the left and nails on the right. There is a difference. Tacks are made of steel and iron, and nails are usually brass. So the top left ones are from the 18th century. I think this is probably universal. The other reason I didn't want to get too much into different nationalities of furniture is that I don't know enough about the history of upholstery in every different country, and so this is hopefully something that is universal. So top left, we've got iron tacks made by hand, and you can see that they are bashed out. So you've got these three very distinct facets on the head. They're sometimes called rose head nails, and they're very distinctive in the frame. The bottom ones are made by machine. They are obviously straight out of the box made now, but from the 19th century they started to make them by machine. So the head then is flat because they're bashed with a pneumatic pump rather than being hit with a hammer. Brass nails on the right, top right, are cast in solid brass, so the head and the shank are cast brass all in one piece. And bottom right of the brasses nails, they're now a brass head on a steel shank, and the shank is round, and the head can be polished brass. The trick here, if you have them on a chair frame and you don't know whether they are solid or not, or they're therefore original or not, if you get a little magnet and you try and stick it on the nail head, obviously the magnet will stick to the modern ones because it's sticking to the metal of the steel shank, whereas if they are solid cast brass, then the magnet won't stick, so you're likely got earlier brass nails. And then just much more modern attachments, you've got gimp pins which are made of wire. Nowadays they come in a multitude of different colors, and so upholsterers use that, you know, whatever fits. Blue ones for blue fabric, red ones for red fabric, and they put trim on with them as well. In the 19th century, when you start to use gimp pins, they were always just little steel ones, but they're much smaller, usually with a little rounded head. And then there's a magazine of staples, which now come out of a pneumatic staple gun. So you can imagine if you've put in upholstery over and over again, you've taken your tacks in and out, nails in and out, you can start to create quite a lot of damage. And damage is obviously okay up to a point, and then it's not okay, and you end up with more damage than frame. So here we've got there's no wood left, basically. What's top left is that's a chair in really poor condition. Mahogany frames particularly bad for splintering, and there's lots of wood loss. So there's an issue for you furniture people, because there's a big hole there now. So what to do? And now I would argue, as an upholstery conservator with some skills up my sleeve, I wouldn't necessarily need there to be a bit of wood there, but that's because I can apply conservation upholstery rather than reupholstery as in a trade shop. That would need to be filled, that frame. Staples can leave a much smaller hole, but they also snap off. So top right is what happens when the crown snaps off and the legs get stuck in the wood and they don't come out. So I don't know which is worse, really. And then they never come out straight either. So you take all these stacks out and they always end up bent and buckled, and it's difficult to get them back in. But taking these things out can also cause quite a lot of damage. So staples that are put in with a pneumatic gun, and the crown of the staple is on the wood or lower, you're going to have to dig that out. So you end up with the divot in the surface of the wood to get the staple out, which is really destructive, actually. So it's all very well saying that they only leave 2 little holes, but they don't actually leave 2 little holes. They leave 2 little holes and a big divot, which is not ideal. So here's the classic. I mean, this is what we find all over, and I have done this in my years of working in trade shops. There's a frame with some holes in. What do? You go to the bandsaw, you get some sawdust and some PVA glue and mix it all up into a paste, and you stick it in the holes. And then the next day it's all dried off and you sand it over, and then off you go again. But the problem with that is that it covers up so much information. So it might give you a new surface to add your upholstery to, but it also covers up all of the information which conservators need for their reproduction, conservation, upholstery work. So here's one that I've marked up on the top right. So you can see that there's some black tack holes on the towards the top of the wood. There's also some other tack holes. I think there's a little pointer thing here. I might try and use it. I just use this pointer. Hang on. Is this a little pointer here? Oh, here we go. So there's a little black one here, and here, and here, and here. So these are going to be iron tacks, this is iron corrosion staining. And then these tacks are later tacks, so they're going to be steel tacks, and there's no corrosion staining around those. So if you look at all the black ones all the way along the rail, if you know what you're looking for, you can associate those tack holes with a generation of upholstery, and then you know that these tack holes are later. So they're from a different generation of upholstery. So that's at least 2 generations, and we've only just looked at a picture so far. This is interesting because this has obviously had, there's a little hole here which has been filled with wood, and here, and here, and here, and these are the original brass nail holes, which somebody's obviously put little wood skewers in and cut them off. And then after that, they've nailed it again. It's the 2nd generation ones that have left these impressions in the show wood. So if we want these ones, we get our calipers, and you can measure from shank to shank, and you can figure out the size of the nail head from the position of those tack holes. The other thing which we would maybe like to look in a little tack hole here, well, that's too far up, but if there's a black hole down here, we can look inside, And if you squint at your screen, right here, just here where this green arrow is a little green fibre. And that sometimes is literally the size of the evidence that we are looking for to report back to the client, which is usually a curator, about what colour the show cover might be. So in this case, I'd already identified this from one of many holes as an original, and there is the little green fibre. So you take that, you stick that under a microscope, and you find out it's green wool. So we can have a green wool show cover knowing that that's the original. But you can see if you put all of this gunk in here, it's not going to be very kind to this tiny little fragment of information here. The other thing about that is if you're going to apply a consolidant to a rail, it's nice if you have a little look in the tacos before you put the consolidant in, because very liquid consolidants will flush this out completely. So if you come along with a brush and your consolidant liquid, you can flush away the evidence that you're actually trying to keep. So look first, consolidate second. So it can get quite interesting. So here is another rail, and this is my little template that I've made here, and I've followed around and I've looked in these holes, and if you follow the thing around here, you can just make out there's a little row of nail holes up and around here. They go along here, and I've tried to line them up with the template there. So that one, and that one are this one, and this one, which are this one, and this one. So you can get your box of nails out and then start to build a picture of what the original nail schemes are going to be. So you do need to get some things out. So I'm thinking maybe you might need to remove some upholstery if there's a broken joint and you need to get to the wood to access that damaged area. So I've got drawers and drawers of ripping chisels and pliers and pincers and all sorts of things. But honestly, these are the tools that I go to all the time. So the two straight chisels on the left-hand side, they're used upside down with the bevel down. A rawhide mallet, because it's not very heavy and it's easy to work with, makes a nice clonking sound, and you want to give it one tap to get under the head and a second tap to flick it out. But you don't, because you're a conservator, you don't want to send it sailing off around the room. You just want to remove it gently from where it is in the wood. You can, if it's a modern fabric and the fabric itself is quite strong, you could put the tool underneath the fabric and use the fabric also as a lever to try and get the fabric up, or you can use the fabric if you're removing it anyway, because it's got to be replaced for treatment, for if that's part of the project. If it's quite strong, you can use it as a bit of a washer and tilt your tool onto it. Otherwise, you can use a piece of Pirelli webbing or a piece of leather, as demonstrated top right. So then we've got two sets of pliers. The pliers are really useful. I use those for all sorts of things. And the ones on the right have a little leg on them. And those are actually made for removing brass nails. But I've never found them particularly useful for that, because they tend to pinch the side of the nail and they squash it in, which is exactly what you don't want to do. So I find those more useful for tacks than not. So bottom right, you can see I would normally have my left hand on the little foot, rather than risk that tool skidding off over the gilded surface. But the cameraman had wanted the clear shot of my right hand with the tool, so this is not exactly as I would be working. I would have my head closer and hands very close, but you can see that the leg is quite useful sometimes on that tool. It comes already welded on the side and you can just prise things off. But what's not usually found in a ripping, in a group of tools for removing things is pencils and a pen. But those are very helpful. But what you don't want to do when you've taken them out is chuck them all in a box, which is what tradespeople do. They just rip them all out, and then if they're going to put them back in, if you say to the upholsterer, can you put them all back in, they'll just randomly go through these things and then they'll just pick out one and stuff it back in the hole. But conservation needs a higher level of accuracy. So really we prefer to take a tack out and put the tack back in. So if we have a little look at this sofa up here, and we can very quickly show you how you might use a template. So for example, if this joint, this is a drop-in seat, it's a sofa from about 1720, 1730, something like that. And again, the condition is very good for this damask, but it's a cotton damask put on in the 1950s. And the interior of this museum wants a Georgian interior, so this is not appropriate. So I was asked to go and have a look, see if there's any evidence of anything original. But I didn't need to take the whole thing off. What I needed to understand was what is underneath. So of this five picture lineup, I'm looking now at the here, this corner here. So I've taken the drop-in seat out and turned it upside down, and now that's this corner over here. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tacks holding that cover on there, which I've taken out. And as you can see, the tacks are still in the show cover here. Because this is nice strong fabric, they just stay in, and that's the easiest place to keep them. This is my template over here. Photographing templates is a nightmare because all you see is a clear bit of plastic, which is Mylar or Melanex, which whatever you call it. And you use your coloured pens, and you may use a blue one for the show cover and a red one for the calico, and you put the template on, make a little dot, and then you can pop them all out, put the same template back on in exactly the same place, next layer, put the red dots on for the calico, and you keep going until you've got all the layers. In this case, it's only 2 layers, it's not that difficult. The nice thick contrast between this strong green fabric, which came off quite nicely, and the calico underneath, which predates that, is that you can see the calico's had some, probably been in quite a damp environment. So these tacks are now rusted, and cotton calico and rust don't really go well together. So if you try to take that tack out, you might just do what this has done and poke a hole in the fabric. So sometimes it's very, very difficult to get the tack and the textile out without damaging either. So you could sometimes just pop the calico off and leave the tack in the frame if you want to. So that's, and then afterwards you just put everything back exactly in the same hole with the same tack, using the template. And there's a bit of another one. This is pretty similar, so I'll just run through this a bit quicker because you've got the idea now. But you start with a row of brass nails, take the brass nails out, you've got those impressions in the velvet underneath. This is a very bold velvet, so it's only the ground fabric that's left now. But here I've added the pencil. So using the pencil, I've now gone back to the frame and marked on the frame the tacks that I've taken out, which, because this is a very, very dark wood frame and the white pencil looks you know, you can easily see it. But unfortunately, for the purpose of the demonstration here, there's not a lot else going on. There's some tack holes up here that I haven't used. But it's very easy way, and the pencil can stay on forevermore, and you can write in your report that all of the tacks that you took out, you marked on the frame with pencil or whatever colour. And it's an easy way for then you and other people to identify what is associated with the upholstery that you took off and not. And then at the end of it, you can use your template and push all the, you know, exact tacks in. So for example, if this cover, it's not going to, but if this cover was going to go to the textile conservator, you can put it back on with the same holes, the same tacks in the same holes. So this might be kind of typical damage. So that's how to have to take things off and put them back on a little bit satisfactory. But now you might be facing things like this. So rather than talk too much about textiles, I just want to talk a little bit about how you can prop things up, basically. So broken webbing and broken base cloth webs are what's called like the straps. They go front to back, side to side. These ones are linen. They're still in good condition from the 18th century, but the attachment has come loose, so that it's not fixed anymore to the frame. This is jute, on the other hand, 19th century and onwards. Jute degrades incredibly quickly, and you get these breaks right across the whole surface. So what's ended up here, heaven forbid someone sat on this chair, and they've just gone all the way straight through the bottom. So it's completely broken from side to side. And then that kind of damage ends up like this. So you don't really need to look underneath to know what's going on. That break causes this big dip here. And this one's got springs, so they're even worse. That's a 19th century sofa, and that has come straight out the bottom. So you can go for seat support. So let's just talk a little bit about seat supports, because I think this is where there is work for collaboration between furniture and textile conservators here. So we've got a saggy seat here, and now it's raised up, and it doesn't take a huge amount. You can do quite a lot supporting those layers, A, in supporting the upholstery, B, improving the profile for display with Z-shaped, S-shaped brass brackets. And you start with a stick, and you bend one bit over in one direction, and then you bend another bit over in the other direction, and you can put a bolt or a screw through that, and you make a padded board which fits here into the void of the seat rails. And then, you know, in later years I decided it might be quite nice to know what's underneath, so you can take a picture and stick that to the underside of the board, and that just lifts the upholstery from above. And also, if you've got damage, it means you don't actually have to deal with the damage. Well, you can just lift it up and kind of secure it all in there. So these are just different things. You've got a solid board, there's a solid board. This one I used wedges because I couldn't get any nails to hang from the surface. So, you know, if you've got your woodworking mind on, you can put a wedge in the opposite direction either way, and then use that stick there to twist. And if you twist two things against a wedge, it tightens it up. So it's self-tightening seat support inside there. And this one, this is a lovely little one. It's a little wooden frame. It just sits inside. And back in the day when you could buy Stabletex, which is a very sheer woven polyester fabric, and it comes in all sorts of colors, and you can see through. So that's the nice part here. And then inside there you can put a solid support, but it's nice to see the original. So sometimes if you've got later upholstery, nobody needs to see that, picture will do, but actually sometimes it's quite nice. So if you can find some sheer fabric, then stick that to your little wooden frame that's all jointed. And here they've just got a little, there's a hole in the frame already, so you put these little turn button attachments there instead of a bracket. So here we've got springs that come bottom. So this project, if you want to know more about it, was published actually in 2008 in the Wooden Artifacts group for AIC. So this was a joint paper that I wrote with Stephanie Rabodan-Offret, who was my colleague at the MFA in Boston. And we had some springs that came out of the bottom. And here we've got our jute web, which has failed, but everything else from there up was original inconveniently. So we couldn't make straight rails like in the frame before, because we would have gone right through the spring. So we sat down with a cup of coffee and came up with these ideas. So we could screw into the frame, which we didn't want to do because we're conservators. We could make this square bracket that came all the way out here, but that would have dug into the upholstery that was there. We could have had angled rails on the inside, but it's definitely that was too complicated to make. So then we ended up with this one. So half depth rail with a bracket at the top to stop it, the frame falling down, and a bracket across the bottom to stop the frame moving up. So this is our little mock-up here of how it's going to hang off the rail. Next slide. And here we are in the process of making it. So all of these springs, everything stayed in position while Stephanie was making these frames. They've got a joint in the corner, a notch in the corner, and a sliding tenon here. And that whole thing, once it's all glued together, it just slides up and inside. And you can see here we've mocked up where the brackets are going to go to hang off of that inside of that rail. Put a bit of brown stain so that it's not so obvious on the bottom, and add the webbing, and then we can just attach the springs to the webbing. At this point, I should say that there is quite a lot of work done when there's springs involved to compress the spring, because the springs are put in under compression into chairs, and they spend their lives trying to get back to what's called their free height, and you need to retain them back into their, you know, the height that they're happy to be at, whatever that is. If you tie them on a slip knot, you can put 1, 2, 3 ties, 3 or 4 ties per spring. You tie them on a slip knot and you go round in circles. You tighten them up, loosen a bit, tighten them a bit, loosen a bit, and then until the seat's happy, and then you tie them off so that they don't move again. And this is the whole suite of furniture. There's 4 chairs, 2 armchairs and a sofa as part of this period room project with reproduction fabric. But also, this might be more what people think of when they talk about conservation upholstery. All these kind of weird and wonderful things that clever people make, including Leroy Graves at Colonial Williamsburg. And this is a shot from his book published in 2015. And he started making non-intrusive systems with copper. It works great. So you have a piece of copper, you bend it at a right angle, and it slides down over the top, and you put a piece of copper on there, and then carved ethafoam. So if you've got traditional upholstery filled with horsehair, that is a moth infestation potential problem. So those things now, stuffy materials can be replaced with modern synthetic conservation alternatives. Here's one made with a Nomex boards that kind of fit in and over, carbon fiber ones, and this was the Sene suite at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, a project done in 2002 by Maison Brazé and Xavier Bonnet, and they come to prominence about 20 years ago, and Maison Brazé has got a really good Instagram page if you go and have a look, and you can see lots more examples of his work, and he's still doing absolutely stunning, beautiful things. But they do plywood frames with traditional work. But if you can imagine, if you've got just a thin little barrier to put down, you can't put staples or tacks in. So now we're moved on to conservation attachments. So this might be outside of your remit of work by this time, but you can see the collaboration, being built up. So there's plenty of work for all different skilled people to do. But I tend to put things on with a herringbone stitch. Very, very occasionally you can glue directly onto your new substrate. So that's a piece of beaver film, which is heat activated on there. And this is a nice little cross section that I knocked up for an interview once. So this piece of wood is supposed to demonstrate the chair rail. This is a piece of Nomex, which is a polyaramide board covered with cotton, stuck on the back, loose on the front for stitching. Here it's stitched. This mock silk show cover is slip stitched there, and then the brass nails shanks are clipped off, and the heads only hot melt glued onto the seat. This was another project published in the same article with a Hunsinger chair. So now we're coming up to making removable attachments. So this is the chair that as it came, original back, definitely not the original seat, but we took off all the non-original things, and I found some springs inside, which is a bit of inconvenient really, because we decided we should keep them because they might have been original, so they had to go back. And then there's these fragments of the original upholstery here. So this is the lashing cord for the spring. This is the base cloth. So we've got all these remnants that we need to work around, and they need to all remain in place. So again, this was very much working with I had two colleagues, Carola Schiller was the other one, Stephanie and Carola Schiller, to make these frames. So Carola made the top one, which just sits on top, exactly the same size as the chair rails, but we've got these little bits of balsa here which sit down but inside all of that original remnants that we've got. And then Stephanie made this lattice of plywood. Now plywood probably we wouldn't use again, we would make it out of the solid, but the point is we made a lattice of wood on the table saw, glued it all together, and then so I had a frame at the top and a frame at the bottom, and we shared a workspace with the mount makers, and I basically said to the mount maker, I was like, I've got two bits of wood and I need to attach them together. So he said, oh, you just need a post and a plate. So they designed and made these plates for me and tapped a hole down in there and screwed it together. So that sits now exactly on top, and the whole thing just comes on and off, and then I could put the original springs back, which sat on top of the lattice. And this is just an in-treatment shot of that same thing. So you'll remember there was a buttoned and plain panel back, and we knew that had to be replicated on the seat. Oops. So sorry. So here we go with the seat, and you can, it's just a sort of fancy shot, isn't it? You can see that the seat now is being worked off the frame. But pieces of plywood only work on straight rails. If you've got curved rails, you need a different material. And it was when I went to the Met, worked with Nancy Britton, that she introduced me to carbon fibre. So this was the very, very first tiny little carbon fibre stool upholstery that I made there, oval stool, and you can just see the process. But there is a whole article about the use of carbon fibre published in 2008 in Icon Textile Group. And you have to cover the rail with lots and lots of saran wrap or cling film, and it helps if you cast against Melanex, Mylar, because you get a nice shiny finish. And you can cut all the strips up and make carbon fibre in a pot. Obviously, this is not the same project because that we never have the right pictures, do we, for the right projects? But you can see the PPE and the wrapping up of the frame, and you know you need quite a lot of kit to do these things, which of course are the pictures that you don't see. So the kit will be. Can I advance my next slide? Oops, I think I've just. Savage in my slide, sorry. Can I advance? Oh, there we go. So there we go. So this might be more what you recognise as furniture people. So this would be an example of gluing up carbon fibre panels on a frame using every clamp that you have, and the time taken to make all the cools and glue blocks and all sorts of things that you need to clamp these things together is not to be underestimated. It is a lot of work. But just to leave you very quickly with some of the projects that we have seen. So that's the Hunsinger chair with its blue upholstery there, this one here. This is the chair with the swags that we saw right at the beginning. This is the chair with the fabric attached with the beaver film, and these are two slightly more recent projects. So thank you. I think I've completely overrun my time, but hopefully it was helpful. Thank you.
No problem, Heather. It was perfect. Thank you very much for this interesting keynote. I think there will be quite some questions, although there are none in the chat until now, but maybe soon. And but anyway, we'll wait with those questions till our Q&A session. And now turn to the first student presentation. Our first student presentation is by Paula Steinborn, who currently attends the Master's Program in Conservation and Restoration of the Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences. She specializes in the restoration of upholstered furniture. This field of interest has accompanied her throughout her professional training. Paula first has been trained as upholsterer at Rabenau in the near of Dresden. Then she started her study training at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts, Hildesheim. In the course of her bachelor studies, she performed internships in the wood and textile workshops of the Bavarian Palace Administration and the State Palace and Gardens of Baden-Württemberg. In August 2023, the bachelor's training ended with a thesis on just the subject she will present this evening. Sitting together, the conservation restoration of upholstery ensembles in Germany using the example of an ensemble from the Castle Marienburg. I'm very happy that she will now provide an insight in this interesting matter. Paula, the floor is yours.
Hello, and thank you very much for that introduction. So, seating furniture meets people's fundamental need to settle down, save energy, or just make life more pleasant. The cultural history of humanity is unthinkable without seating. I do share this opinion, and that is why I dedicated my bachelor thesis to upholstery, specifically upholstery ensembles in Germany. Today, I want to share the results of my thesis with you. At the beginning, there was only one chair. This chair is from the castle Schloss Marienburg near Hanover in Germany. This castle was built as a gift from King George V from Hanover to his wife, Queen Mary. The chair is part of a group of upholstery objects that were drafted by the architect Yvan Darcis for the rooms of the two princesses Mary and Friederike. There are two known historical photographies showing chairs of this build in the parlor and the living room of the princesses, dating back to 1867. Research from the historian Isabel Maria Ahrens shows that the ensemble was probably made in 1866, and what makes it special, the current upholstery is likely the original one. I studied this object very closely throughout my bachelor's and gained some insight into upholstery conservation. It was difficult to find a concept for this chair as it is part of a bigger ensemble with 24 objects in various states of decay. As you can see here, a lot of the objects were stored in the attic, as you can also see, but they are already placed in better conditions. One problem for me was the question, how could I find a concept for this chair, making sure it was treated as necessary and make sure that it wouldn't end up looking very different than its counterparts. It was clear I had to look at all of the objects belonging together. This presented the next problem. Looking at 24 objects in the very detailed way I looked at the first chair would be too time-consuming. From this point, I developed the following questions for my bachelor thesis. To this moment, how are upholstery ensembles handled in Germany? Is it possible to gather the information necessary to develop a conservation concept in a time-saving way, for example, through a methodical approach? Could this methodical approach be used to develop an overall concept for the ensemble? And with this concept, is it possible to preserve the overall picture of the ensemble? Concerning my first question, how are upholstery ensembles handled in Germany? I found that even though historical upholstery was much respected at the time it was fabricated and guarded against the sun and wear and tear with protective sleeves, they are not the most prominent objects in conservation. There is little literature describing upholstery conservation in general, and even less concentrating on Germany or specifically on ensembles. In the last decades, the interest has increased, but there is still the tendency to give upholstery objects to an upholsterer without detailed instructions that are based on the findings of an historian and/or conservator. The upholsterer will then take off any historic upholstery without or very little documentation and rebuild it in a way they think it should look like. Often, the cover fabric will be fitting to the rest of the room the object will be presented in, but not historically accurate or based on findings. The new state of the object is often exactly that, a new state, with little or no historical basis. In the case of ensembles, there is the additional risk of the objects not looking alike after treatment. The risk is high if the objects are not treated at the same time and from different people. There are some examples where this happened and different materials were used and different upholstery profiles achieved, resulting in objects with different optics. Also, with this practice, a lot of information is lost. As upholstery objects usually are reworked after a relatively short amount of time while they are in use, original states are rare and there is a significant risk of losing the few originals that still exist. And even the different states an upholstery object had during its lifetime are a part of the object and at least documented. More and more, this is implemented in the treatment of upholstery objects in Germany, thanks to dedicated conservator restorers lobbying for this underappreciated group of objects. My next question was, is it possible to gather the information necessary to develop a conservation concept in a time-saving way, for example, through a methodical approach? Here, the obvious way to go was to develop some form of worksheet that could be worked through efficiently on-site. This was the main part of my bachelor thesis. I developed a worksheet for the ensemble overall to gather general information, for example, how many and what kind of objects there are, and what materials can be found on them, and there is a space for a sketch of the upholstery structure. I developed another worksheet for the individual objects to gather information on the state of the different components on the object. I chose the different characteristics that are being evaluated based on my training and through comparison of different historical furniture with upholstery. The characteristics are evaluated in 4 different categories, which are defined in my bachelor thesis. The 4 categories are no direct need for action, minor need for action, medium need for action, and urgent need for action. The aim was to take a step back from the very detailed observations a conservator restorer makes throughout the interaction with the object and concentrate on the more general information. For example, is the fabric damaged badly? In what state is the wood? Is the upholstery still intact? The categories are color-coded for better visualization, and there is space for a picture and some additional individual information about the object. As the individual worksheets can be filled in Excel, they can also be analyzed with Excel. It was a bit difficult to find a way to present the results in numbers without giving a false impression of the quality of the gained information. I could not use percentages as that would be a misrepresentation. In the end, I chose to go with a summation. The Excel sheet that shows the results of the individual worksheet shows for how many of the objects of the ensemble a trade is categorized a specific way. For example, this showed that this ensemble has 10 objects with dangerously damaged fabric and urgent need for action. So in the end, you get individual results for the objects and overall results for the ensemble. Here's one example for the individual results. As you can see, this chair scored mostly urgent need for action, minor and medium need for action follow in second place, and no direct need for action was chosen least. The gray part represents categories that weren't chosen because they do not apply to this specific object. And here is a part of the general results. You can see how often the different categories were chosen in the ensemble. So no direct need for action was chosen most, and medium need for action least often. For me, this was a methodic and easy way to tackle the amount of objects belonging to this ensemble. Because I already was familiar with this ensemble, I was given the opportunity to test my worksheets on another unfamiliar ensemble in the Castle Schloss Marienburg. There was a need for minor adjustments to the characteristics that were looked at, as the objects did have a few different constructional details. Aside from this, it went great. I was able to gather the information for 20 objects, transfer all of it to the computer, and evaluate it in about 1 day of work. So, could this methodical approach be used to develop an overall concept for the ensemble? After collecting the information, I did develop an overall concept for the 2 ensembles. They are very general, and I'm sure that some adjustments are necessary as someone will get to work on the objects. But it was possible to formulate an approach. It would be very interesting to go back and check this after the objects have been treated. The suggested treatment plan is based on various inspiring examples of upholstery conservation that have been published. And with this concept, was it possible to preserve the overall picture of the ensemble? Ultimately, this question can only be answered after the treatment of the ensemble. I do think and hope that the treatment plan I suggested will help with this. At the very least, I think that some awareness has been generated for the objects, which is really what is needed. After I finished my bachelor thesis, I did treat the chair with which all of this started within the parameters of the suggested treatment plan and the arrangements with the responsible conservator restorer, and these are the preliminary results. Thank you very much for your time, and I am looking forward to your questions.
Marjolein, there is maybe a problem with the sound. We cannot hear you, or I cannot hear you.
Okay, so sorry. Thank you so much for your contribution, Paula. Am I now?
Yes,
Anybody hear me?
perfect now. Perfect
Great.
now, yes.
I'm sure there are questions. If you would put them in the chat, then we can put them forward again in the Q&A session. Our next speaker is Sarah Beach. Sarah first became interested in conservation as a cultural and historic preservation student at Salve Regina University, Rhode Island, United States of America. She has worked for a variety of cultural institutions, including the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Preservation Society of Newport County, the National Park Service, and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Now a furniture major in her second year in the Winterthur University of Delaware program in art conservation, Sarah's main projects include the reassembly of an Empire-style card table, the paint consolidation of a Pennsylvania German painted box, and the surface treatment and stabilization of a bulwark table. Sarah's talk deals with 2 New York couches, which are again bring us to upholstered furniture. However, the focus of her talk is about a special type of surface decoration of the wooden parts of the couches called Verte antique. This decoration is popular in American high-style furniture of the early 19th century and maybe also in furniture in Europe. Sarah, the audience is yours.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm very excited to be here today virtually to tell you all about Verte Antique. All right, so as a bit of a roadmap as to where we're headed today, I'll start with some important historical context, both about Verte Antique as well as the American neoclassical period more generally. Then I'll walk through my analytical findings from both the Colonial Williamsburg couch and the Winterthur couch, followed by a brief comparison of the two and a note on ongoing research. I also have a note on the slide about terminology, because unfortunately there's a wide variety of spellings and terms that are period appropriate and refer to the same decorative technique. So do keep that in mind if you decide to do your own research on the topic. To begin, what is Verte Antique? This term refers to a decorative finish applied to a substrate such as wood, plaster, or metal to mimic the appearance of patinated bronze. These hues could vary, but deep green prevailed as the most popular, especially for the feet or legs of a piece of furniture. Historic descriptions of the Verte Antique process vary, but generally include a layering of different mixtures of varnishes, pigments, and/or metal powders to produce a rich surface. Due to these complex structures, the craft is often linked back to the historic trades of metal lacquering, grain painting and marbling, and gilding. Verte Antique can also be separated into 2 general categories: those systems that are natural resin varnish based and those that are gesso based. Okay, though a frequent element on American neoclassical furniture, Verte Antique is largely understudied and underpublished. It's important to understand the complicated stratigraphy of these decorative surfaces prior to attempting any sort of conservation treatment. In the mid-18th century, the archaeological discoveries at Herculaneum and Pompeii stirred international interest in classical civilizations. Looking at examples of the types of artifacts excavated from these sites pictured here, it's clear that Verte Antique is derived from this aesthetic. The visual elements used in American neoclassical furniture tended to be less from actual artifacts and more derived from English and French interpretations of antiquity. Flourishing in the aftermath of the American Revolution, the late classical style is also referred to as the Empire style, as it was largely influenced by the stylistic choices of the Napoleonic Empire. Like the new regime in France, the newfound America sought to align itself with symbols of strength, unity, and beauty all present in classical design. In this unfinished portrait of socialite Juliette Recamier, Jacques-Louis David captures the neoclassical tastes of the French during this period. Englishmen were frequent tourists of the aforementioned classical sites in Italy as part of their grand tour, a coming-of-age custom in which upper-class men traveled the continent for educational means. Though neoclassical tastes would be transported to many of the bustling American port cities, Verte antique decoration appears almost exclusively from pieces made in New York and Philadelphia. Trends took time to cross the Atlantic. As such, America saw the neoclassical style begin to take hold at the turn of the 19th century. These pieces featured here from the Philadelphia Museum of Art serve as excellent examples of high-style American neoclassical furniture. Popular motifs included acanthus leaves, lyres, urns, and other vessels, and beasts such as griffins, chimeras, and hydra. Highly decorated surfaces were in vogue over clear finishes, except in the case of dramatic, highly figured woods. Speaking of highly figured woods, I'll now talk about my work analyzing the Verte antique feat of this tiger maple couch at Colonial Williamsburg. The Colonial Williamsburg Foundation includes a living history museum of early American artifacts and historic structures located in Williamsburg, Virginia. This analysis took place whilst I was a graduate intern in the Materials Analysis Lab last summer under Kirsten Travers Moffat. The curator had noticed that multiple green paints could be seen upon close inspection of losses to the feet and requested analysis to better understand the paint history. In cross-section, it's clear that the feet have been repainted in their lifetime. Here, the Verte antique includes a natural resin that serves to seal the wooden substrate, followed by a green paint and another natural resin varnish that is hard to see in visible light conditions. This top varnish layer is disrupted and with a distinct layer of grime, suggesting a relatively long period of exposure that defines these layers as the likely original Verte antique. And for the sake of time, my presentation today is not going to discuss later alterations present on either couch. At 1,000 times magnification, it becomes clear that the green is mostly an optical mixture of blue and yellow pigments. The blue particles are very characteristic of Prussian blue. They lack a definitive particle size and shape and instead present as amorphous areas of deep blue color. In cross-polarized light, Prussian blue is isotropic and therefore not visible. The yellow particles are also an excellent example of lead chromate or chrome yellow. Particles of chrome yellow are small with a capsule-like shape and have a bright yellow color in plain polarized light. In cross-polarized light, these particles have a strong birefringence and a distinct yellow-green interference color. Upon my return to Winterthur in the fall, I was interested in further pursuing research into Verte antique for my scientific research project, which is a graduate requirement for the conservation program. Luckily, Winterthur had just acquired this couch from the Kaufman Americana Foundation, and the curator was just as curious about the Verte antique as I was. Though of the same period as the Williamsburg couch, the Winterthur couch is more high style with its ebonized frame, stenciled decoration, and incorporated upholstery. This cross-section looks quite different from the Williamsburg couch. It begins with a relatively thick layer of a light-colored gesso. Applied directly to the gesso is a mysterious and very diffuse green layer, followed by a more saturated layer of green paint. Metallic highlights appear selectively applied on top of this green paint, and then the final layer is of natural resin varnish, which completes what is likely the original Verte Antique paint scheme. Again, chrome yellow particles are clearly identifiable by their morphology through polarized light microscopy, but no other pigments could be confidently identified in this sample. Elemental mapping using scanning electron microscopy uncovered more information about the layer structure. The previously mentioned diffuse green layer was hardly distinguishable from the gesso in visible light conditions, but elemental mapping revealed it to be a distinct layer high in aluminum and silica. This is consistent with a clay-rich bowl that a gilder may use. Also important is the metallic highlights have a high copper and zinc content consistent with a brass alloy. Together, these layers suggest a possible desire for the brass highlights to be burnished to a high shine, which would not have been possible without the bowl preparation layer. To summarize my findings, the Williamsburg couch had 3 layers of Verte Antique and was based on a natural resin varnish. Also of note with the Williamsburg couch was the lack of any sort of metallic element in the system. In contrast, the Winterthur couch Verte Antique is 5 layers and gesso based, and the Winterthur couch included brass highlights. The only real commonality between the two being the use of chrome yellow pigment. So the major differences in the Verte Antique structures of these 2 couches is very representative of why more research needs to be done on these incredibly complex systems. For areas of ongoing research, I'm interested in further investigating the green paint of the Winterthur couch for the presence of a blue pigment. Prussian blue and indigo are the chief blue pigments noted in the historical record, and yet none of the analytical techniques that I have performed so far have suggested the presence of either of these pigments. So further sampling may be necessary to try and solve this mystery. And finally, the Winterthur couch is near identical to a couch owned by the Baltimore Museum of Art, pictured here. The Verte Antique of the BMA couch was previously analyzed in the 1990s, and I hope to compare my findings from the Winterthur couch to those of the Baltimore couch in hopes of relating the makers of the 2 couches to each other, as well as situating them in the greater practice of Verte Antique decoration. Thank you for listening, and I'll take questions later.
Thank you so much for taking us on this interesting journey, Sarah. I saw some similar techniques on a couple of furniture, but never had a name for it. Thank you for the name now. It's fascinating that you and maybe some listeners are joining the conference from the other side of the big ocean. Marjolein, you will go on and start the Q&A session.
Yes. Can everybody hear me now? Great. We are starting our first Q&A session, and I hope you put all your questions down in the chat. Heather, would you please unmute your microphone? And the first question is about how do modern conservation approaches like Leroy Grace, etc., match to the experience of actually sitting?
That's for me to answer. Yeah, you can make conservation upholstery structures sittable. The thing about them is that the process is to make them not damage the frame. That's what makes them a conservation upholstery treatment. And if you've got a little frame that sits on top of the chair rails, that you can put as many tacks or staples as you like into it. So if you've got a chair rail with another piece of wood around the top edge, and then something down the sides to fix the fabric to, you can put webbing, horsehair, stitch the edge, put the calico on. You can do anything you like as long as you attach it to your new piece of wood. So you can actually make a seat that would be identical to fixed upholstery, but fix it to something that is not the original frame. But so you can do that for domestic use. The reason why some organisations prefer to use non-traditional materials is mostly to do with pest infestation, because sometimes you can open up a horsehair chair and they all fly out, and which is obviously not what you want, because if they're chomping away on your horsehair, it's probably not that bad, but if they fly off and then start eating your wool fabric on another chair, then that's really bad. So it's mitigating the risk of that. But yes, you can definitely reupholster things absolutely using the traditional way, and that's what the French conservators do. They always use traditional materials and traditional techniques.
Thank you. You're very popular with questions. So another question is about experience with conserving modern upholstery from the last century, and what kind of experiences do you have there?
Not much, to be absolutely honest. I think in this case one should know one's limits, and that's probably mine, because there's a whole, because even though these things are upholstery objects, I mean, I guess the question is what to do with degraded foam, because polyurethane foam and latex foam gets quite crispy or sticky, or loses its shape, or isn't springy anymore, and there's a whole host of issues with that. And as far as I know, there's nothing you can do to make it come back to life. I mean, once it's gone to that degraded state, then it's gone to that degraded state. But there are much better conservators who specifically concentrate on the conservation of modern materials. So I don't want to say anything a bit silly, but I would find it very difficult to conserve a degraded foam, put it back to its original appearance without kind of properly removing it and then replacing it with a conservation alternative and putting the cover back on. I have done that once or twice before, but yeah, very, very limited, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you. There was also a question about, would it be possible to give a date from the steel nails that would have been used on when the upholstery would be put on the furniture?
Yes, I think there's most things turned in. Well, this is why I don't want to be date specific, because I'm not sure whether it's universal. But let's just say in the UK, the change was during the Industrial Revolution. So I see things from the Regency. So from about 1810, 1820, you're still seeing solid cast brass nails and handmade iron tacks. But by the 1830s, 40s, then the machine-made alternatives start to come in more, and then after that, maybe they're using up the old handmade ones, and there's kind of going to be the kind of a mixture of both for a while, and then machine-made ones completely take over.
Thank you. That's actually very useful. I had a personal question, because I'm a textile conservator and I still lament the loss of not being able to find stable text anymore easily.
I know.
Very painful. But Would something like silk crepeline or conservation net might work as a way to keep it see-through, even though these materials are less strong?
Exactly that, yeah. And yeah, I think you're right. I wouldn't bother with net. I mean, net is amazing in what it does, but it's stretchy because it's because it's non-woven. It's got basically all those little circles all over it. So whichever direction you pull it in, it stretches out. So as a support, it's completely useless because it just stretches out. If you put it on as an overlay, it's fantastic because it's really good if you lay, as you well know, but talking to everybody else, but if you lay it over something that's three-dimensional, it's fantastic because it goes up in every direction, still remains smooth. Silk crepeline, yes, would be the alternative to Stabletex because it's woven and therefore stronger in both directions. But it's made of silk, which is not such a it doesn't last so long, and it's more tightly. It almost seems quite tightly woven. And you'll know this. It's kind of got a milky sort of appearance, so you kind of can't quite look through it. But it's sort of semi-opaque, so it does the job. But sometimes for those systems, if I wouldn't rely entirely on the even on the Stabletex to do the work completely, so that you put the little frame, you stick the Stabletex to it with beaver film is the easiest thing to do. You put some beaver around the outside, heat it up with a spatula, sticks all nicely on, but that will just about hold up the upholstery that's there. It will never be enough if there is what's called the politely called accidental use. So if a visitor comes in and sits down, then the bottom will just completely fall out. So sometimes you can add within that frame, you can add a solid support as well. So you've got two supports, so you can pop out the solid one to see without having to take the Stabletex off, which is protecting the upholstery, and then you can put the solid one back in for strength.
Thank you. There was one last question. Could you recommend current training courses for upholstery conservation, or do you give them yourself in Europe possibly? There's quite some interest in this.
Yeah, it's a really sad state of affairs, actually, to be quite frank. It's very difficult to find upholstery training now. And even internship opportunities are getting smaller and smaller. So this is not a very positive start to the answer for the question. But there used to be more opportunities in America because there were more upholstery conservators working there. But the crunch has happened now, and they were all of a generation, and so they were all within 5 or 10 years of age of each other, and they're all retired. They literally have all gone. So we're kind of in this sort of middle road of having a bit of a vacuum of places to still go for upholstery training. I do teach the ICON in the UK, and it's at various places. And for the last 10 years, I've taught the Institute of Conservation. It's called Back to Basics. There's a whole series that talks on different subjects. So I do teach the Upholstery Back to Basics course, which is for 2 days. And there's one that's recently been advertised, or will be advertised shortly, and it's going to be in October this year in London. It's mostly it's in person, but there's not that much practical work. It's more PowerPoint presentations and discussions and case studies, but a lot of examples and hopefully a lot of suggestions for places to start treatments. But actually, in-person internships is very difficult for now, so not a positive answer.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your contribution, Heather. It's I think it was incredible much information you gave. And the next questions go to Paula Steinborn. Would you please unmute your microphone, Paula? I think you are there, and let's have the first question, which comes from Julia Schulz. What kind of training one would need for filling out or using these worksheets? Can someone without an upholstery background use them?
So the goal was to make these as low threshold, well, as easily accessible as possible, so that everyone with some basic conservation training could use them. And I designed some informational sheets that are additional to the worksheets, where everything is explained in fairly good detail.
Perfect. So you are ready to share your worksheets with other persons.
Yes.
Perfect. Another question of Angelica, is the blue fabric on the bench you showed based on findings or on the taste of the owners, especially in the light of the brownish color of your chair?
So actually, every fabric you could see was original. The decoloration comes from the sun, so from the UV light, and it discolorated in like I think it's like a greenish, and the yellow mostly stayed the same. And the fabric itself is, you can turn it around, and then it's you still see the original blue color.
Okay, not the taste of the owners. No, okay. Another question from Lukas Schad. Do you think that upholstery conservation is still not widespread enough in Germany? What do you think is needed to change this?
Oh, I think this is very complex. I do think that it could be more widespread. I think a lot of people look at these objects and only see their own specialties, so only see the wood or only see the textile and don't see the object as a whole. So that maybe awareness could be raised. And I think just talking about it, if you are interested in it, talk about it, and probably then more people are going to be interested in it. And I do think that all that is needed is some people who are interested in preserving these objects.
Okay, thank you also for this answer. Maybe last question. Have you tested the system on other ensembles beyond the bachelor thesis? Where can the system be improved?
I did not test it myself on anything else. I did hear back from the conservator restorer who is responsible for the castle that she is using it, or something inspired from it. But I think she's using this one, and I think there are a lot of ways that it could be improved that probably go beyond our time limit here. So, I don't think Excel is actually the perfect way to do this, because you have a lot of information, a lot of different tabs in Excel, and then it takes a lot of time to load it. So that is one thing, or how you show the results could be perfected or maybe thought over. Yes, I go into detail into that in my thesis.
Okay, always in development. Thank you again for your contribution, and Marjolein, you will go on with Sarah.
Yes. So the final questions before the break are for Sarah Beach. Would you please turn up your microphone, Sarah? And the first question is a thank you for drawing the attention to the upholstery, from the upholstery to the feet of the two sofas. And did they get it right? Is Verte Antique an artificial patina? Is the intentional Verte Antique sometimes visually overshadowed by the natural aging of the patina? And what is your suggestion for conservation restoration?
All right, that's a big question. Well, so if I understand correctly, there is a certain amount of aging of the like faux patina surface, but it depends a lot on the pigments used. There's historic documents that actually note that Verte antique craftspeople should avoid using copper-based greens because they'll darken over time, which is really interesting that they had that awareness. So if there was a copper-based green in it, you would certainly see more aging, or perhaps the brass somewhat corroding, but I haven't really seen that in a lot of the examples that I've looked at. And what was the other half of the question?
Is the intention of the Verte antique sometimes visually overshadowed by the natural aging of the patina?
I think it can definitely be obscured, for sure. I do think that it makes it difficult to do research on this subject because unless you're really looking at close at these surfaces, and often with a bright light, you might not even be able to tell that it is a green. So that's absolutely another problem in the Verte antique research world.
And the last part of the question was, what is your suggestion for conservation and restoration?
Well, I do think that cross-section microscopy is super important to just like understanding the layer structure and having a better sense of what is potentially historic, Verte antique applied by a craftsperson versus later restorations. So I think that's an important first step before considering removing any additional layers, which often get applied onto these surfaces because they are feet, they get banged up, they get worn over time, so they see a lot of life.
Okay, thank you. I also have sort of two not very much questions as comments. Some research has been done at the predecessor of our training program at the University of Amsterdam 25 years ago, but probably not as extensive as yours, but it could still be around somewhere, so maybe that's something to look into.
That sounds great.
Yeah, and a comment from Julia: have you considered Raman's spectroscopy for the identification of maybe the blue pigments, since indigo or ultramarine are very suitable for that technique?
Yeah, I did run a sample using Raman, but I think it was more of a problem with the sample because the results, the spectra just were not telling me much information at all. So I think that's definitely one of the first techniques I'll reach for in future sampling of the legs.
I just saw pop up a last question, I think, about does the Verte antique influence degradation on other parts of the object?
Not any time that I've seen. Not in my experience. It's pretty isolated. Sometimes the Verte antique is very close to other gilded surfaces, so they often see a lot of the same like layer structures when they're that close together, but they don't really affect their degradation.
Okay, thank you so much for difficult questions.
Thanks.
Okay, again, a warm thank you to Heather Porter, Paula Steinborn, and Sarah Beach, and also thank you to the audience for the many interesting questions. Before break, let me short point out the book of abstracts to you. This PDF can be found via the link in the chat and contains abstracts of all papers of the 2024 edition of ConNext. Our little break will not last too long, but it should be time enough to get yourself a cup of coffee, a nice cup of tea, and see you back here in 10 minutes. Bye.
Welcome back, everybody. We'd like to start again.
Yes, we can, Marjolein. Go ahead.
Great. So we will now go on with Juliana Gomes Noves dos Santos, from the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar in Portugal. Juliana dos Santos has a degree in museology from the Federal University of the state of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and in conservation and restoration from the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar, IPT. She's currently attending the internship program of the master's course in conservation and restoration at IPT, specializing in furniture, developing the study and treatment of a wooden carved Indo-Portuguese bed. As a first-year master's student, she participated in the conservation and restoration of wooden cabinets as part of the typography IPT project. Fernando Antunes, adjunct professor and integrated research of tech and art, technology, restoration and arts enhancement of the Center IPT, specialized in conservation and restoration of furniture, altarpieces, wooden structures and artifacts. Luis Soares is the conservator restorer of the Parque de Sintra, by the way, a fantastically beautiful cultural place near Lisboa. I know it. He is member of Art History Institute of the University of Nova of Lisboa as well, as the School of Science, Social Sciences and Humanities within the IN2 PAST Consortium, which is the associate laboratory for research and innovation in the heritage, art, sustainability and territory. Juliana, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, and hello everyone. I'm going to present the work we have been developing during my internship in a wooden carved Indo-Portuguese bed from the National Palace of Pena in Sintra, which we believe dates back to the 16th, 17th centuries. So this is the bed. It is carved in teak wood with decorative motifs, mainly representing India flora in high relief. But there are also some motifs characteristics of Renaissance and Mannerist styles. In its inventory record, it is referenced as being produced in Old Portuguese India estate, and in 1939 it was transferred from the National Palace of Ajuda to the National Palace of Pena. There is insufficient documentation regarding this bed. The inventory record was created in 2005, and the oldest documentation referencing the bed dates back from 1910, found in an inventory record in the National Palace of Ajuda, following the fall of the Portuguese monarchy. We know that the bed had been on display in the Vereador's room, which is this one, for a long period before 2005, but we don't know for how long. We also know that a disinfestation treatment was carried out in 1976, and we are also aware of previous restoration treatments. However, the period when this occurred is still unknown. The National Palace of Pena is currently engaged in efforts to conserve and reconstitute space and period environments, and this bed is one of the objects included in its conservation and restoration program. As such, the palace is interested on research about the artistic style, the original type of decorative surface, as well as its journey to the palace. This are some of the questions we are investigating and that we intend to answer during my internship. And so here we can see other typologies of Indo-Portuguese objects dated from the 16th and 17th centuries, and we can observe similarities between the shapes and decorations. So before I further address the bad states of conservation, some context is needed about the environment surrounding the National Palace of Pena. It is located at the top of the Sintra Mountains, and it experiences a coastal climate. The temperature is notably low and humidity levels are high due to the dense vegetation. At times, the high humidity creates fog in the palace's cloister, which then enters internal spaces and exposes objects to increased humidity values. And these environmental conditions contributed to some of the issues the bed exhibits, such as the extensive corrosions of the squares. As previously mentioned, the bed underwent a restoration treatment, but some of those already need attention. As we can see in the first picture, where the filling of the leg needs to be redone. In the other pictures, we can also see older treatments. Apart from the need to review these previous treatments, the bed also displays some fissures and gaps, some resulting from fluctuations in humidity levels, while others stem from its assembly and disassembly because most are located in fitting parts. However, the most significant concerns are the numerous layers of colored and uncolored wax. Historically, until almost the end of the previous century, it was customary for the room vigilance of the palace to oversee the cleaning and maintenance of the objects. And because these vigilants lacked training in conservation restoration, they often treated the objects as they would in a domestic context, which typically involved periodic wax application on wooden furniture. For instance, in the first photo below, we can see a dark wax layer in a gap area. Furthermore, we will see two pictures that illustrate how wax was applied solely for aesthetic purpose, primarily in visible and reachable areas. So, after the disinfestation treatment we conducted, we gained a better understanding of the amount of wax layers present on the bed. These are some photos taken after this treatment, during which the product we used softened the wax, resulting in a lustreless and sticky appearance. Then there is this question in the inventory record: has the bed lost its polychromy? As I have mentioned, documentation concerning the bed is scarce. We don't know who created the inventory record, but they noted the discovery of some traces of polychromy. So upon a closer look, using a magnifying glass, we identified these peculiar looking traces, which may be polychromy. Historical accounts indicate that it is commonplace for Indo-Portuguese beds to feature a color lacquered coating and some with a gilded coating. There are also records from specific regions and periods in Old Portuguese India state when the beds lacked such kinds of decorative surfaces. Therefore, Finding the original decorative surface could provide crucial information into the bed's origins and production time frame. So then we collected some samples, and what we thought could be polychromy, the exam's results indicated that it was only wax with a clay filler. In these photos, we can see the thickness of this dark wax layer. We have also collected other samples from different parts of the bed. Some of them indicated some traces of shellac varnish, which we believe may constitute the original protective coating. Now, moving on to the cleaning process. As I have said, as we can see, the bed exhibits different tonalities. Darker tonalities are due to the natural aging of the materials and other physical and chemical reactions. But alongside this, we can see that the darker tonalities are most visible in reachable areas as opposite to the brighter ones, which are found in difficult to reach areas. This suggests that the varying tones of the bed result from the excessive application of wax in specific areas. So alongside the pulse, we decided to clean this dark wax because it was applied without conservation restoration criteria and methods, or even technical polishing quality, and also to look for any traces of its original decorative surface. So we are currently immersed in this cleaning process, approaching it with meticulous care and patience, while remaining vigilant for any irregular or different traces. However, cleaning the wax is proving to be quite a challenge. The wax is tightly bound to the wood and impregnated on the surface of the wood fibers, so we must repeat the process many times. And during the cleaning, we found some traces, such as gold, as we can see in the first picture, even though the quality is not very good. We also found this trace, this red trace, which we believe can be red lacquer. In the third photo, we found traces we believe might be red lacquer too, as well as in the photos below, but black lacquer. And these ones only came to light after the cleaning of the dark wax. But none of these traces have been subjected to examinations for identification yet. So in addition to the ongoing cleaning process, we still need to address the structural treatments required by the bed. However, our challenge lies in determining the appropriate type of coating to apply on the bed. Given the lack of the precedents for this particular treatment, we still need to research and discuss our options in order to undertake this decision. And this is it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Juliana, for your interesting presentation. What a nicely carved bed. I hope that the last riddles of the conservation project can be solved in the ongoing study. But let's turn now to the next and last presentation of the evening. Next up is Yvan Darcis. Yvan Darcis is a first-year master student with a specialization in textile conservation, aiming to start a research program in the next phase. Important experience in the practical conservation of textiles is limited to the conservation of a painted silk fan containing a complex structure and degrading adhesives from an old conservation treatment. Their current project is the conservation of a Victorian parasol. Yvan did research on lead white pigments made by electrolysis and made successful reproductions. Their current research topic, which they want to present, are the degradation mechanics of dyeing with metal tannin complexes to result in black weighted silk. Please go ahead, Yvan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. Well, thank you for your introduction and welcome everyone. I will be presenting my master's thesis on black weighted silks, which I'm currently working on. It's part of the research project called Safe Silk, and Safe Silk aims to understand the degradation of the weighted silks with the ultimate goal of preventing its degradation or finding an effective treatment to stop it from happening further. My results will thus partially influence the approach Safe Silk will use to achieve its goal, which means that my reproductions will be tested with multiple analysis techniques and also put in an aging chamber or aged artificially, as to see if these reproductions are similar and show similar degradation types to real weighted silk. I would have hoped to give you some results from my reproductions, but unfortunately there has been a delay with the aging chamber, and as such there's also been a delay with my master thesis. So this will be more of a theoretical presentation of what I want to do, but I hope it will still be useful for wood conservators, as weighted silk is also can also be found in complex objects containing both wood and textile, and as Paula said, it's more important to conserve your objects than to be an expert in one of the two. So anyway, we'll be oh, there's an arrow on my, which is not mine, so if someone could put their arrow away, please. We'll be showing our overview with, I'm sorry. We'll start with contextualizing weighted silks and to see what it is, how it's made, and why it has been used. Afterwards, I will be showing you my literary research on black silks with tannin-metal complexes and what I have found would be important. And based on this, I will be also showing my reproductions and what I have done, and then further analysis that I would like to achieve on my reproductions. So as to start, we need to identify silk. Silk is a protein polymer which has a very high crystallinity degree, and sorry, I'm just completely drawing a blank. The protein it is made out of is of 75% fibrin and 25% sericine, which is also called raw silk. But this sericine is disadvantageous to the manufacturers of silk. And as to remove this, you can boil your silk, which means that we'll keep only fibrin and have a weight loss of 25%. However, silk was sold and still is sold by its weight, which means it is profitable to enhance your weight of your silk without enhancing the surface that you need to sell. So as a solution, manufacturers around the end of the 19th century had a solution of artificially weighting their silk. The most important manner of this is weighted silks, and it's artificially weighting of silk with your salt by repeating baths, introducing your silk in these salt solutions, and by putting them in and out again, the salts can agglomerate on your silk fibers and thus enhancing the weight of your silk. But this has is very problematic, as it accelerates your degradation mechanics of silk. It can be going up to 4 times as fast as non-weighted silks or just regular silk textiles. It's also known to influence crystallinity negatively and making silk more amorphous, but the process isn't really exactly understood, and the cause of it has never really been defined, but we know that these weighted salts almost always are negative for the silks. However, in some cases, the weighted silks degrade slower. In short, weighted silks are still a mystery in the conservation of textiles, and thus also in the conservation of objects containing textiles. It is mostly found in costuming, but it can also be found in drapery, upholstery, and other objects containing textiles. Now, you can weight silk in different manners. The first part is of colorless silks, which can be done with sugar, but has never have really been used practically because it degrades the silk even faster than others. The first successful manner of weighting was with mineral weighting, and more specifically with lead acetate, which could double the weight of the silk, but add other complications as to which they still found other solutions, and other white salts such as zinc, barium, or aluminium were also popular. But the most popular by far was tin chloride. Tin chloride is used because it effectively has a very good relationship with other tin chloride salts and can agglomerate way faster than the other ones. There's two popular recipes that can be found, which is the pink weighting, which is here is only tin phosphate baths, and then dynamite, which is a more refined process than pink weighting, which uses tin phosphate silicates or tin phosphate aluminium silicates, which is part of a research of a colleague of mine who just graciously lent this graph to me to show that when you start with your weight and you enhance and you use it for 1 bath, 2 baths, 3 baths, 4 baths, or 5 baths, your weight can be doubled, tripled, and in literature there's also some mention of a weight augmentation of 1000% if you do 10 baths, which is quite a lot and thus very lucrative for the manufacturer. Next up is then the colored silks, which can be done with just weighting with a white salt, which gives us a colored silk, and then afterwards using synthetic dyes to give the color which you want to desire. However, black silks cannot really be achieved with these synthetic dyes, at least not during the periods that weighted silks were used, because synthetic dyes only achieved a grayish light black color, which is not what was wanted of a black silk. So the manufacturers still returned to ancient recipes that are already known for millennia and were used centuries prior to just on other textiles such as wool, cotton, but also silks, with the use of tannins. I am sure most of you are familiar with tannins in wood conservation, as this is rather important in your field. And this then comes to us the metal tannin black silks, which can be firstly done with tin chloride plus tannins, but also just give more of a rather brownish and not really a black silk. But then if you combine it with iron compounds and tannins, this shows the most classic recipes made to dyeing your silk or other textiles black. In whatever mixture you make these, you can always almost be sure to achieve a very dark color, even if it's dark red, dark brown, dark blue, or black. So this comes to us to our three most important ingredients, which is the tin chlorides, our iron compounds, and our tannins. These can be put in whichever order and how many ever times you can use them in a recipe. I have found 92 different recipes for black dyeing, which 61 recipes could be defined as weighted. Defining weighted silk is not really that easy because in literature there's not really a common definition. There's not really a common definition for black silks, black weighted silks, as most people just define it by its weight, but some people just say it as the silk which only contains fibrin gaining back its weight that was lost by the boiling of the ceresin plus 10%, which means just a weight gain of 35%. In other literature, they just say if the weight is augmented for 50%, then it's weighted silks, and so on and so on. There's not really a standard, which is a problem. I will define my definition a bit later using something different than weighted silk, but that's for later on. For now, it's just important to note that these three salts, you can combine them to make black silks, and you can also repeat steps of the process multiple times, which I would be calling repeat baths, to achieve darker colors or a more heavy silks, which then of course gives weighted silks. Our most important materials can be defined by our metal compounds or tannins, And then they can play 3 roles, which is firstly weighting of silk, which is most simply defined as just giving weight to the silk and nothing else. The other role a material can play is dyeing, which is giving a color to the silk, which is mostly been for the tannins here is very important. And then there's also mordanting, or mordanting is kind of achieving a link between the silk and the tannins to achieve a heightened color and making sure that the tannins get, well, sorry, are better kept on the silk. But it's also important to note that one type of material can also have the multiple roles, such as here the iron sulfates and the iron acetates are used for weighting, dyeing, and mordanting. Here, just to define that tin chloride is only used for weighting, as it is a white and clear solution and only gives weight but doesn't really give the color. Under colorimetry, it is slightly yellow, but it's very negligible and almost doesn't help anything. Potassium cyanide is used for dyeing, but also gives weight in theory, and it's a kind of like Prussian blue, which makes it a very clear blue. And then the other 3 have a very darkish reddish color, and this is also resulting on the silks. For the tannins, are resulting on the silks. For the tannins, I already mentioned there's categorized as mostly dyeing, but there's also a couple of them which can be weighting of the silk. Especially Kutch is important in this one, as it's mostly used and mentioned in recipes as a weighting tannin, and less so used for its coloring. However, it still gives off a brownish color. There's 2 types of tannins that are important here. Is the polyflavonoid tannins, which are not soluble in water and thus are more water fast, and when washed are better and give better colors of higher quality and can be kept longer. Hydrolyzable tannins are less useful in this case, as the name itself says and implies. They're soluble in water and thus are less water fast, even if they're mordanted with one of the other metals. After multiple washes, the color is less important. But our most important tannin is actually logwood, which is used in almost 75% of the recipes, and is the most prime. Maybe it's also the most prime important silk to give the dark blue colors and dark blacks. Then there's also Mirabola, Dividivi, and Wallonia, which are mostly just called up as a replacement for the gallnuts. Now that I have defined the different roles that our components can play, I define weighted silks by how many of these weighting materials they use, which to me is if the metal compounds or tannin with weighting properties are used more than twice during one dyeing process, or if multiple different salts are used during one dyeing process, and of course if tin chloride is present in the recipe. This means, for example, that there's 2 recipes that are very similar, which just use gallnut and sulfate, and the other one uses gallnut and iron acetate. The gallnut and iron sulfate, they mention that you can dye it twice. The first one gives off a grayish color, and if you dye it twice, it gives a dark black and gives a satisfactory result. But another one asks for gallnut and iron acetate that can be dyed together for upwards of 15 times, which at that point is not about the color, but more about weighting the silk and thus being able to sell less silk at a way higher price. Our most important and most mentioned ingredients are the iron sulfate, potassium iron cyanide, tin chloride, Kutch, and logwood, and these will also be the ones that I'll be using in the found recipes and the reproduction that I will be making. All of them have been found in the book of Edmund Knecht, in a manual of dyeing volume 1. The differences in the recipes are, first of all, here in recipe C, one of them will be pre-weighted with tin chloride, as this just gives the colorless silk, and then the recipe will be the same. And then in recipe A, there will be another weighting after the bluing of the silk to give more weight. But however, in the other two, there's more denting with the iron sulfate, which is used to fix the iron cyanide, but also for the logwood and the cutch afterwards. This brings us to putting our silks in baths. One sample of silk has been in one bath of the iron sulfate, and another silk 2 times in a bath of iron sulfate, and so on until the last one, which is a maximum of 5 repeat baths of iron sulfate, which gives us a very nice degree in coloring. In the recipes, mostly they ask for 3 or 4 baths, which gives satisfactory results, according to the writer. Then when you use the blue, you have received very beautiful colors. And you can also see the recipe, which uses tin chloride, gives darker shades for whatever reason, but it's very interesting. But unfortunately, in the next part, most of this iron cyanide has been leached out of the silk. It wasn't during the iron sulfate baths, but mostly afterwards when you need to soak it, and it lost all its iron cyanide coloring, except for in the first one, which is dyed with tin and cutch, which still gives a very darkish brown color, which is positive. Afterwards, we do it with cutch. You can see that it also receives a more black coloring, which could also be considered satisfactory results, but is still really brown, and not really black. And finally, dyeing it with logwood gives us our final results, which is 3 different types of blacks, with A being more in a brownish tints, B being more blue, and then C being more in the greenish tints. But as you can see, different recipes, even if one step is only different, give very different results. Now, the weight has also been measured in between every step, as to see how much weight will be gained with this recipe. ConNext also has written down the theoretical weight gaining that every step needs to be made, as seen here, with a total of 73 to 83%, but in reality we only achieved 37%. This could be due to many reasons, but our most important and weird parts are highlighted in red, which is the loss here of a little bit of weight. I just think it's due to the loss of tin salts and being replaced with iron sulfate. The most strange one is here because it needs to be said that 24 to 30% of weight should have been gained, but we basically have 0 weight gain, but no real solution or hypothesis could be made with current literature. So this is something I need to research further because it's very curious to me. Afterwards, it's also dyeing with logwood, but also the same. I just think it's gutch that hasn't really been more dented exactly to the silk, but similar results are also found in the other 2 recipes. Then I would like to analyze this in different ways. Of course, the first one is colorimetry, which we have done today to identify the difference in colors and the uniformity and intensity and the saturation. Microscopy to identify the threads, the fibers, and the degradation that might have happened during the production cycle, and then the textile strength and how the amount of salts and the tannins influence the strength of the silk. Then most important to identify the salts that have been that have settled on the fibers. We will be using PXRF to just see how much salts actually are on the silk. This cannot really be mentioned in absolute numbers, but by using the same measurement instrument, we can relatively compare it in between one recipe as to see how much the salts have, the amount of salts have augmented. Then identify the salts. We will be doing with XRD, which will identify the crystal salts formation, and hopefully if the tannin metals complexes are crystalline, will also be identified with this process, but this is not sure. But what is of very importance is the oxidation state of the iron and tin that will be identified with this program, and which is very useful to know, because if it would be put in an aging chamber, this oxidation state has a high chance of changing. And then SEM EDX will also be kind of complementary to microscopy and to the PXRF, but also give us a very nice relief of how the fibers will be looking with the salts on it. and potentially even finding diameter changes in the fibers due to the salts that have agglomerated on it. And then lastly, just pH conductivity to see how much it changes are done during the productions, ATR, FTR to identify the tannins, and identification of maybe other organic complexes that have been formed during the process. And if this doesn't work, we can also just use spot testing to identify the tannins and metal tannin complexes. As I mentioned, I would have liked to use an aging chamber of 4 weeks to 8 weeks, but this has not been available, so this will be probably used after my research further on by Safe Silk. But now we have a current solution of aging in a water bath of 3 days to 7 days under UV light, which is quick and efficient, but we're not really sure about the accuracy, but it is an intermediate solution as to at least have some type of agent degradation. I hope it was somehow clear and rather interesting to you, but if you're interested, you can also further read other sources or just follow the rest of Silk. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Yvan, for your very interesting presentation. Oh, sorry. Thank you. We now have our final Q&A session for today. And there are a few questions in the chat box. And we'll start with some questions for Juliana. Juliana, could you please turn on your microphone? And yeah, you're there already. Great. So Andreas wants to thank you very much for your interesting talk. You mentioned in your abstract that the National Palace of Ajuda and the Parc de Sintra, Monte da Lua, follow a special philosophy with regard to interventive treatments, and that art historians, conservation scientists, and conservator restorers are involved in the appropriate discussions. Are the results of these discussions recorded or published? And if so, where and for whom are they accessible?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat?
Yes, sorry. You mentioned that there's a philosophy, a special philosophy that's worked with in the National Palace of Ajuda and the Parc de Sintra, with regard to interventive treatment, and that art historians, conservation scientists, and conservator restorers are involved in the appropriate discussions. There was a question about, are the results of these discussions recorded and published, and if they are, where would they be published and for whom would they be accessible?
I think there is an article that is published, but I don't know the name, exactly the name. I can look for it and leave it here in the chat. But it is something that it's been doing in the palace for some times, and there is not already completely done. And I think that it's still there is very articles no, there is no much information published right now, but I think that it will be.
Okay, thank you. And a sort of a combination of two questions. There was some real interest in with what methods did you use to remove the wax, and combined with what type of cleaning method did you use on the object?
I'm using white spirit with a swab to carry out a controlled cleaning, and sometimes a bamboo stick to reach the corners to remove the wax. It's very, very slow method.
Oh, that's part of our job. Sometimes it's slow. And another question was, you mentioned that you will add a new finish, and which are the finishes you are considering at the moment?
And we are still thinking about it, and any decision has to be made with the palace. But for now, we thought applying B-wax, since the bed already have been protected with it, or a shellac varnish layer to create a kind of separation layer, and then B-wax. So anything that we add can be easily removed and not affecting the wood.
Okay, thank you. And there's a last question about the bed itself. Do you know if the bed ever had a canopy?
No, there is no record that of a canopy in the bed, and we don't believe it ever had, because there is no marks of it that indicate any piece that is missing for now. And the bed is not that tall.
Okay.
So,
thank you so much for all these questions and for your presentation.
thank you.
There are also some questions for Yvan. Yvan, can you please turn on your microphone?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, Sophie wants to congratulate to this fascinating subject. Maybe she missed it, but does the weighting the silk also have an aesthetical function besides just making the fabric more profitable?
Yes, it was mainly used, or I would more define it as an excuse to weight your silk, as it is weighted, it has a shiny gloss, and as Margaret also mentioned, there's a screw which just, if you touch it, it feels very coarse, almost as if the silk is dry. But mostly to make it, it gives better colors, as I explained, but it also, next to it, has a better draping, which means if you let it fall, because it's heavier, it has better waves and just falls more aesthetically. But as after 5 to 10 years it completely dried out, your silk falls apart. So there's an aesthetic reason, but they already knew in the 19th century that it isn't really a very practical option.
Okay, they already knew that this weighting soon will lead to damages or to harms to the silk.
Yes, exactly.
That's right. Okay. Can the typical damages be compared to those caused by natural aging?
Of my research, of my reproductions, or just weighted silks in general?
In general, I think.
They can, but not always, and that's the whole problem with weighted silks. There's very little research, and what is research is mostly of, we don't really know what is happening. They know that the gracility becomes more amorphous, but they don't know how and they don't know why. There's a couple of theories, but none of them seem to be correct. But you can mostly see it as just an accelerated aging of non-weighted silks, but not always. So it's yes, but no, actually.
Okay, it's often in conservation restoration. Yes and no. Marjolein wants to know, is there a notable difference in condition in weighted silks that are dyed black and between weighted silks that are undyed or dyed with synthetic colors?
Yes, but I don't know all of them. But a prime example would be for me is the tannins, as you know, tannins can be used as a method against corrosion, or just can be used in in conserving or slowing down corrosion. And one of my theories as to why a lot of black weighted silks are still here, next to just that is one of the production methods, could be that tannins slow down this process, as oxidation would probably be one of the damaging factors in these weighted silks. And these tannins are not present in colorless weighted silks with tin chloride, which just use synthetic dyes.
Okay, thank you. It's already late, but we have one last question of C. Nolven. Do you think there is any kind of link between this degradation and the one which makes leathers red and very flaky?
I don't know much about leather, but if it's dyed with tannins, it could be. But I'm not really sure. I think red and flaky is more about, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay, no matter. Marjolein, you will end up the session.
Yes. Well, this brings us to the end of this fourth ConNext session 2024. I'd like to thank once more our keynote speaker, Heather Porter, and a really big thank you for all student speakers today, Paula Steinborn, Sarah Beach, Juliana dos Santos, with co-authors Fernando Antunes and Luis Soares, and last but not least, Yvan Darcis, Andreas and me. We would like to thank our institutes and partners at ConNext, and at last but not least you, the audience, for making these events happen. We really hope you had a good time. And the next ConNext session is all about decorative services with keynote